All right, well, everybody, thank you for coming to Code on the Beach. My name is Friedman. I have basically grew up here in Jacksonville, went to Tallahassee, stayed there for 8 years working at random companies, came back to Jacksonville thanks to the help of IR, worked at multiple companies where I'm now at a company called Availity. I highly recommend, if any of you all are interested in the job market, to go and look at Availity. We have an amazing culture. It's a great team. I'm an ADM there, so I'm currently over about 30 people or so. Have 3 different Scrum teams. The culture's great. The engineers are great. We are moving to AWS as a healthcare organization, which is big because most healthcare companies are just now trying to move to the cloud. Our VP, Mike Pravat, is heading up that, and we're making big strides to go ahead and do that. So if you're interested in actually doing the cloud and what I'm about to talk about today, which is budgeting, highly recommend checking out Availity, joining our team. We would love to talk to you all and get to know you all and have you come and be a part of us. So let's go ahead and talk about budgeting in the cloud. I don't know how many of you guys are engineers, how many of you all are directors and managers, because I know it's an interesting topic, right? I'm talking about money at a coding conference, but why? Because as people are moving into the cloud, engineers, managers are now more driven to understand their budget, their bottom line, how it impacts a product's viability, how it impacts EBITDA for the bottom line of the company to be profitable. So why is this important? As I said, it impacts the bottom line. So if you want your company to be profitable, if you want your product to be viable, you need to know how much does it cost to run the product. Most products are on shared infrastructure. How do you split out those costs? It's really difficult to drill it down into those costs, and then also having to figure out what's the total cost of ownership. There's so much more to a product than just simply saying, I got $1 million to build it, and it's only gonna cost me $1 million to maintain it? How do you know? You have to spread that over time. Doing that in the cloud is so much easier than doing your standard infrastructure of what it costs to do maintenance. And you can actually go ahead and forecast, plan it out, set up budgets within the cloud to actually monitor it and run reports daily to see, are you burning high, are you burning low in terms of profitability. Also moving into the cloud is now putting the ability to be financially responsible in the hands of engineers. As people architect, as people do work, they have to pick out technologies. Within the cloud services, you can go and do all of that, and it puts it into the hands of the engineers. It is no longer a director exercise of, it's gonna cost me $100,000 for this server, it's gonna cost me $50,000 for maintenance of blades, it's gonna cost me $150,000 to rent out a place for a data center, right? It's all now done and hosted for you by your cloud provider. Let's talk about the different parts of the cloud. There is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Why does this matter when doing budgeting in the cloud? So if you go on do a standard lift and shift model, which is taking your infrastructure and moving to the cloud and doing infrastructure as a service, typically you should see a reduced cost, but you're not going to be able to do any kind of cost reductions in such as, I know the big thing a lot of people don't like is a reduction of staff. So a lot of people don't like that talk, but if you do infrastructure as a service, you don't really get to have that ability to do it. You are simply moving, you still need people to maintain it, you still need people to patch it. Platform as a service, you may see that there's a bit of a jump of cost, but the maintenance for you is done by your cloud provider. It is done by Microsoft Azure, Google, whoever you pick. But you can move your financial needle by doing a reduction of staff, reallocating people onto more viable products that may be needing help to get more profitable, and so on. And then what to measure? What are you measuring, right? Are you measuring the profitability of an application? Are you measuring the profitability of your entire organization in budgeting? And I literally stole this quote from one of my old directors. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that's the big thing when it comes to cost management, especially in the cloud. You need to be able to accurately manage, in my opinion, to the penny. I like to know, where's my money going? How's it being spent? Am I getting the most bang for my buck? and do I need to, increase server capacity? Do I need to reduce server capacity? Do I need to increase throughput, reduce it, and so on? And the cloud makes that really easy. It's literally a couple clicks versus, hey, I have to go order the parts, I have to go put somebody out there, and so on. Reviewing your options. So the big thing that a lot of people need to realize is as you're investing into your cloud infrastructure and onto the cloud, you should be looking at reserved instances. That is a contractual agreement between you and the cloud provider over so many years, but you get a significantly reduced rate. And when I say significantly reduced, if you do a pay-as-you-go versus reserved instance, sometimes in the reserved instance, you can see a 50% decrease in costs. It is massive. So while you may think like, hey, it locks me into a contract, the fact is that you're getting that cost savings, right? You're getting that reduced cost. You're like, hey, I'm not gonna change servers. I'm not gonna change that type of technology for that instance of period. And it could be, I think contracts usually run from anywhere from 1 to 3 years. So highly recommend to look at reserved instances. Most companies, when working with a cloud provider, have a contract on hand. Most of the engineers don't know about that, right? They're just shopping services. They're looking at Cosmos DB, DynamoDB, Redshift, whatever, and they don't realize that their company may be actually getting a discount on those products because it's whatever you have negotiated with the cloud vendor. I've seen cloud vendors have 10 to 20% off of VMs. I've seen them giving 5% off of their software as a service program. And then also shopping the deals. So I worked at a company, it's been about 3 years ago, and some of the people here may know about this, at least I know one of them for sure does. We built an entire production application using a free service. And how did we do it? By looking at the free service that they had available online for Azure Functions. We level set with the client on what runtime would be and the ingestion time of the product would be. We forecast it out and we're able to use the free option versus paying it. So it is possible to pick a free service to run production applications as long as you know what your throughput is, what the actual usage will be, and forecasting and level setting correctly. Let's go to the next one. So that's what I mean by shopping the deals. And also, there are some deals that on the paid services, like on Cosmos DB, they will say, hey, we're gonna give you 1 million transactions free. Understanding what that means on transactions, it could be reading, writing, could be going ahead and doing updates, but look at them and forecast it out. There's ways to save nickel and dime. As much as the cloud companies are trying to nickel and dime you on picking your services, you can also go back and nickel and dime them by looking at what are they offering at a deal at that current time. Reviewing your current architecture. So this is another thing I've seen at multiple companies that people don't do correctly. They have an infrastructure they already have set up. They know they bought this beefy server. They may not necessarily need that same server for that product on the cloud. Go and reviewing your metrics, reviewing what your input and throughput is on that application, on those applications, depending on what you want to do, and then right-sizing it. You may not need the highest level of Redis. You may not need the beefiest SQL server. You may be able to get away with a much smaller tier, or you may not need high availability. You may thought at one point you needed it, maybe you don't. Right-size before you make that move and invest the costs up front. Because while it's easy to go ahead and do a pay-as-you-go and switch, it is also more difficult than to have to explain to an end user, hey, here's why you're seeing a slowdown because we've had to reduce because we're really not getting that traffic to support that application. Let's see. And also, as I tell everybody anytime that they want to move to the cloud or picking a product, start at the bare minimum. Don't start at the max. And then slowly ramp it up. Because if you start at the max and go down, it's not going to be a fun time for anybody. People are going to say transactions are failing out, things are not working as they expected, but if you start at the bare minimum and you start seeing it, it's really easy just to go ahead, like I said, it's literally maybe a slide of a dial, click of a drop down, click OK. It's usually active to active, so you don't have to worry about, oh, am I going to kick people off? It will just be like that. So where to start? The pricing calculators. I have met many engineers who had no idea that these calculators even existed. These calculators, while they will run against what is the standard cost of the product, the good thing is this, that once you go ahead and you print out your estimate, you'll be able to take it to either your rep or whoever's running your contract, and they'll be able to say, yes or no, you have a reduced reduction of cost. But understanding that these calculators exist, they have every service and every cloud provider that I've worked with. I only picked Azure and AWS because those are the main ones I have worked with over the past 4 to 5 years. And I know GCP has one, so Google Cloud Platform has it. I'm sure Redshift has it. Use these calculators. They have every service. Understand what you're looking for, though. Don't guess or fudge the numbers that much. Unless you're doing storage. Storage is super cheap. I always like to say, hey, what does it look like for 60 terabytes or for 100 terabytes, just to see. And sometimes you'd be surprised and you're like, oh, it's like $5 difference. I think I'll go ahead and get the extra 100 terabytes. So definitely use a calculator. They are your friends. Monitoring your budget. So this is, once again, another weird thing that I've ran into other companies that people didn't know existed. So most of the applications or most of the cloud providers have budget controls in place. As long as you set them up, you know what to measure, and you know how to set up your resource groups. You can literally drill down to the application to see the cost, which in shared infrastructure is next to impossible. If you have 50 apps sitting on the server, you don't know what the one app is gonna cost you versus the other 49, because they're all sharing, they're all using that same ecosystem. Here within Azure, AWS, or your cloud provider, you can literally monitor to that application. And you can monitor to go up to a resource group, and you can go up to your entire cost. AWS has budgets. You can say, hey, this application, I only want to spend $20,000 a month. And it will show you over your month-to-month cost how close are you to that budget, right? So use the controls that are given to you in place, set your budget. You can set limiters. One thing a lot of people don't understand is also most of these cloud providers offer sandbox subscriptions. So what you're paying for your prod environment, if you get a sandbox subscription, it's not going to be the same cost. They're going to give you a deeply discounted cost. Why? They want you to use their products. They want to make you pick different products, try it out, and start using them as their main source of services. So always work with your rep, understand what the difference is between your prod license and your subscription licenses for Sandbox. Highly use it, especially if you want to start doing POCs. Let's see. So now for the fun part. I could talk for another, 30 minutes and droll you guys into a sleep and deal with stuff. I'm much bigger on having having people work within an organ or a presentation to demonstrate stuff. So you guys came to a budgeting thing. What more fun for budgeting than is to have a chance at winning some money? So I'm gonna pick 3 people. Out of these 3 people, here's the exercise I want you guys to do. I want you to sell me on an idea of how are you going to plan and budget for a cloud project. And then I'm gonna have the crowd vote. Whoever wins will win $50. The other 2 participants will win $25. So whoever comes up here will walk away with something. So do I have any volunteers for who would like to try and present and sell to the group on cloud infrastructure? JLP, I'm gonna go ahead and pick you then. Let's see. Angie, yes. And let's see, anyone else for the last spot? If not, I will pick somebody out that I know. Jocelyn Sitson, can we call you to the front, please? Yes. So, you want to go, Malik? All right. Come on up. All right, so all 3 of you come up. So these 3 people who are coming up, I've worked with them over the past couple years at different organizations. They've worked with me in places where I have implemented the cloud. I have been doing, like I said, cloud development for about 4 to 5 years. I have been in multiple positions of dealing with budgeting being the main focus. For whatever reason, I always get stuck in being the guy who's like, hey, explain to me the cost. How do I plan this out? How do I forecast? And then also I'm a big fan of platform as a service, just so you all know. I'm not an infrastructure as a service guy. I do like SaaS. I'm very big on using those tools, especially when I don't have to download stuff onto my own machine to do my development work. So I've always been stuck in those positions. So let's go ahead, as you guys can see the presentation. Which one of you three want to go first?
Okay, let me just, so we need to sell an individual on the cloud contract. The benefits right now is 20% off, right? Or 25% off of the services. Let's see.
You had 20% off of all VMs, 25 discount if you use PaaS or SaaS services. So let's break this down into simpler terms for how we're doing all this. You have an application that brings your company $2.5 million in revenue. It's sitting on an on-prem server that's costing $3 million with other applications. How do you go ahead and determine on that $2.5 million revenue application, how do you move it off and make sure that you're going to generate that much revenue or more, depending on how you pick your services, and how you're going to be able to split it out and know that those other apps aren't, jacking up with that cost. So some help that's going to help you with it is that you have a 20% off on all VMs. You have a 25% discount on all PaaS and SaaS services, right? The product is not going to have to share infrastructure. So you can put it on its own server, you can put it on its own resource group, and you can monitor it. And then you have your rep. So like I said, always make sure you talk to your rep. Do you want to go first? JLP to go first?
Who are we selling to?
You're selling to the group.
Selling to the group?
Selling to the group. And then, so as the group listens, once they're done, wait for everybody to finish, and then we'll go ahead, by the sound of claps, whoever's the loudest will be the first, and then we'll call it a day, and I guess we won't call it a day, I'll open up the questions. So do you want to go first?
I will
All right.
So, group, we just found out about this new product.
Talk a little louder.
As I'm going on the
There you go.
And what we found out is that by having our services in the cloud, we're going to definitely reap some benefits. One of the things that we can benefit from now is there's certain controls that allow us to understand the cost. Right now, we don't even understand the cost that we have for our on-premise services. We'll be able to have graphs. We can even set certain limits where it'll tell us, hey, we're starting to go overboard. And we want to make sure that if we start to go overboard, we can even scale back. And then we can also be able to sell it to other individuals, because other people in the company, because then they can understand how much data that we're using, how much cost that we're using there. Also, there's a benefit as far as in using in the cloud that we're also able to get a 25% discount off of these services that we have. One thing that we also, am I allowed to go beyond this?
Absolutely.
So security.
Sell them. Listen, you are here to sell them. You're here to sell everybody on how are you going to budget, how are you going to maintain it in the cloud.
Yep. And so backup security. So when we think about having just on-premises, if anything goes wrong, if anything catastrophic happens with the on-premise services and all the data we have there, we have built-in backup security that we can also be able to restore certain things by relying on another service that is much bigger than I'm thinking one company, right? That's much bigger than ourselves, right? We have the ability sometimes, I don't know if this one has it or not, but the analytical services.
Oh, Malik, what are you doing?
Am I going beyond?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
I already know what I'm going to ask him once I get up there.
Yeah.
And so I think I'll stop there then.
All right. JLP, not bad. Good job.
First of all, what is the app as far as how does it interact with itself?
How does it interact with itself? Good question. Let's say it is. All right, I'll pay you back. Let's say it's an app for scheduling rides.
Oh no.
It's an app that schedules rides on Uber or Lyft.
Okay, and how is it? What it is right now is what IIS with SQL backend.
Pick.
Well, I'm not going to recreate your app unless you want decisions.
That's why I said pick. Pick PaaS, pick any of that, and how you want to do it. As you see that there's a 20% off VM, so you can go infrastructure as a service. There's a 25% on PaaS. How do you want to sell it?
For Not talking about refactoring and rewriting all the code.
Forget about refactoring, not writing. Think about how do you sell it to a budget. You're right now, everybody here right now is a CFO. How are you going to sell it to them?
Moving the application front end itself into the cloud, you can leverage the PaaS and SaaS offerings, which will force you end up paying more as you make it high availability, but it allows you to have multiple instances. So as volume picks up, it will scale up and then scale back down in off-peak hours.
I like that. So you're talking about go ahead and doing auto scaling. Excellent. So that's a great way of also handling the cost.
For your SQL databases, I'm going to say they don't have DB links between the databases.
That's perfectly fine.
Complicates
Yep.
the question, unfortunately. You can use the Azure SQL offering, which if you only have limited usage, you can use the already hosted where they just give you a number of transactions for a price, or if you know you're going to have ups and downs, you switch to the vCore model, which means you run a minimum of 1.5 CPUs and 1 or 2 gig of RAM, but you can tell it what your maximum scale is. So when everything picks up.
Which one did you pick though? Would you set your transactions or would you go ahead and do the vCore model?
That's the vCore I would use with the serverless auto scaling.
Excellent. So for people who don't know, there's also within a lot of these databases, real quick for background, there's called the elastic pool model.
Pool is only good if you have multiple databases.
Exactly.
If you only have one database, you can still go with ETOs,
But there's a limitation to that. That's why with the vCore model, basically you can take your infrastructure as a service, or you can take your infrastructure, look at what your CPU is. It will tell you actually how many vCores it is, and then you can downsize it. If you pay for only so many transactions, it does eventually start to throttle, but it's usually cheaper if you forecast it right.
But the vCore, if you run vCore serverless, it starts at 1.5 CPUs.
Yep.
And you put your maximum, and you tell it
To auto scale.
auto scale up, and then only auto scale down when it's been X minutes since the last significant use. So if you just have minor use, it will scale back down a minute or two later to what's required. By using Azure SQL, you also get to the millisecond point-in-time restores, as well as daily, weekly, monthly, yearly backups at you're maybe paying for one yearly, a monthly for every month of the year, 4 weeks and 7 days. You're paying maybe an extra 5% on your monthly bill.
Excellent. So I like the fact that you're covering the LTR, SCR policies on it.
And it will automatically recommend if you're missing or have indexes you don't, that somebody decided that DBA said you needed but you don't need, it will tell you can get rid of them. If the DBA missed some indexes, it will automatically recommend or even include those indexes for you if you tell it to.
So let's throw a curveball in here. I want to have DR, and I want active to active. Where are you going to put the region?
If you're talking Azure,
Yep.
which is what I've been doing so far, it has a built-in choice of paired region that is DR, that if you're using East US, it goes to West. If you're using East 2, which is in Virginia, it uses Chicago.
What does it do for cost?
Roughly doubles.
About.
There's a few caveats there depending exactly how you set up the active to active, but it roughly doubles because you're running 2 instances.
But how easy is it to go ahead and do your DR testing?
When it dies, when Azure detects it's dying, if it's active to active, it fails it over for you.
But how easy, if you want to run a DR test as an organization, which I'm sure people who've been here, having people on staff to go ahead and simulate DR, it's extremely costly, extremely costly, and it takes a long time to go ahead and set up and run. How long does it take to do it within the cloud service?
I'm trying to remember for SQL what the active active.
Forget about SQL.
No.
Forget about running a DR plan as a whole.
The issue is for a lot of the active actives, they won't let you manually fail over the DR on some of the services. Others, you can power it off yourself, but if it's an always-on service, the only way to actually test your DR is to trust Microsoft to kill it.
Well, but they also have, I don't know if you ever looked into it, but they have a DR service that you can go ahead and click run test my DR, and it will auto fail over. And it's literally for a quick simulation, but rather than spinning up, all the time for, I think like at Availity, it's an all-day event for us to go ahead and do our DR failovers, and it's not fun. We did a data server migration a couple weeks back. I will tell you right now, I was there from 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. the next day with my tech leads, making sure we were all set and ready. Being in the cloud, it takes seconds. So all that money that you spent on personnel being on staff, it goes from it being an all-day, marathon to being a couple seconds. What else you got?
And then depending how much developer time you want to spend, there are ways to leverage other services, functions, which if you have limited runtime on functions, it's free and the cost does not scale up drastically if you can convince someone to rewrite the entire database.
So JLP here was at the company where I wrote the free Azure Function Service to run a production environment.
I'm sure yours came out completely for free because
It was free until they needed to switch out the plan for recovery because we were having transactions
even
fail
that
out.
is not always free because it's per region. Your limits are per region, not per resource.
That's fine, but we were in the East region.
So were a bunch of other functionality.
Yeah, we're not going there.
It's turned into a working session.
Yeah, this is about to be like, let me show the charts. All right. So thank you.
Good job.
All right, Angie.
You got a question back there.
I do not know why you
Hold
picked me.
Hold on 1 second. We'll hit questions after we have her present, and then we'll go from there.
The infrastructure costs on-prem, is that including the services and the resources?
For infrastructure on-prem? Yes. So right now, your $3 million is your total cost for running that server. Your app, that's $2.5 million of revenue, is sitting on that server.
Okay.
So you have no true way to delineate how much is your one project or your one product that's bringing all that money in, how much is it truly costing? What's your total cost of ownership? There's no way to truly delineate that out without spreading the costs.
So if my audience is CFO, they want to hear numbers, right?
Yes, that's
So-
typically how CFOs work. That's
If our revenue is 2.5 million for this,
Yep.
on cost 3 million, we're at negative 5.5 million.
Yep,
Right.
you're 500,000 shy of having any
So,
profit or
Right
breaking even.
off the bat, if we were to just go with the cloud, we get 20% off. Just say, let's say 20% off of 3 million. That's a 600,000 that, so right now we would now be under the revenue, so our costs are gonna be less. So just from a numbers perspective, and then if you get another 25% off of that, or 25%.
If you switch
on
it
Yes.
from being an infrastructure service to a PaaS.
So let's just say the cost was 3 million, 25% off of that is 750,000. So you're gaining
Okay.
money either way, and then you're saving even more money by the resources
Okay.
that you would not have to worry about because you're using the Azure Rep and possibly even the maintenance, KLO budgets and all of that because somebody else is handling that.
All right, so you're looking at more from a staff reduction model. So what she is selling here is leveraging immediately the percentage discounts off, which will go ahead and put you in a profitability standpoint. Then looking at a staff reduction model to go ahead and increase profitability. As much as I know everybody hates the idea of staff reduction, here's the problem. Real quick show of hands. Who has read The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt? Okay, that's one. So, quick thing on The Goal. The Goal is about process management. All Agile and Scrum methodology has derived from Eliyahu's Goldratt principles of theoretical constraints. One of the big things he's talking about in the book is he has a guy that's working in a manufacturing plant. He is talking about how he brought in these new robots that go ahead and do stuff for people and putting these parts together. And he's like, oh yeah, according to our KPIs, we're saving money. The reality was they weren't. They weren't increasing throughput, so they weren't making more widgets. They didn't do any staff reductions. So all they did was they just have people now watching the robots or maybe helping on another line, right? But they aren't really reducing staff. So what the robots were doing is it was giving this false sense of idea that, hey, because that the process is automated, we're able to kind of push things through and have it be built, that we were more profitable, which is why I started in the beginning of, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And also you need to know what you're measuring. So if you're measuring profits, make sure you're truly measuring profits. Make sure you're taking every piece into account. Your staff costs, your server costs, your maintenance costs. Don't just think of, oh, I have the cloud, here. It costs me, like I said, $3 million to run it, right? It makes me 2.5 that. If I keep all of my same staff and I move that to the cloud, that somehow I am going to gain it. In reality, your 2.5 million and your 3 million costs, remember, your 3 million costs may also not account for your personnel that runs it. And I'm going to be honest, personnel is expensive. We are an expensive commodity from a fully loaded rate. So make sure you know what you're measuring.
Is your 3 million including AC, electricity, and floor space?
It's just the full server cost, man. So yeah, it depends on whatever the data center sends out your way.
How long before you can get out of that lease?
Let's just say they go ahead and it makes it more, well, that's a good point. But what if it is that you're able to generate more profit out of your application, you can turn that 2.5 to 5.5. Then it doesn't matter if you break your lease. If your lease is only $100,000 to break it and you just went ahead and you generated another $2.5 million, a one-time loss of $500,000 is a drop in the bucket. So I like the fact that though Angie literally let us use the percentage discounts, let us look at also dealing with our rep, because our rep also is there to help us solve the problem. So thank you, Angie. I appreciate it. No, well nobody ever likes to talk about staff reduction, but it is the reality of how do we do that. And it doesn't always have to be a termination. It can be a reprioritization, but if we reprioritize people to another product, make sure that product is going to be viable and that will actually increase and drive profits up, not down.
It could take people off of current projects.
Yes.
That are ending, and they know it's got to go to maintenance, but they could move on to something
Correct.
better.
Or you could
and
put,
this can handle the maintenance piece.
and for anybody who loves accounting for CapEx or OpEx, you can move them to a CapEx project. And then with the magic of accounting, you can go ahead and write that loss off of your bottom line. So there's ways of also doing that without having to do staff reduction. So real quick before we take questions, let's give a round of applause for everybody who went ahead and stood up and talked. All right. So now real quick for the voting time. Let's start with Malik. Can I get a round of hands of how we all thought Malik did? Okay. That sounded good, Malik. Let's do JLP. Wow, you guys are not making this easy because it all sounds the same to me. All right, let's do Angie next. Okay, so we all just did the same, so thank you. I have no idea how to do this.
Yeah, but are ties friendly?
Exactly. So JLP, I'll go ahead and I think you covered a lot more and you went into more in detail, so I'll go ahead with you as the main winner, so thank you. So come on up here. Go spin that wherever you want, don't spin all in one place. Go ahead and invest in the cloud, it's a great way. Angie?
Maybe.
It should get a lot more. Malik. All right, so now I will go ahead and I will open up to questions. So who has any questions, and feel free to ask away, grill me. Say I did horrible, that's also acceptable. Yes, sir.
So CFO is asking me, has legal next to him.
Yep.
And is asking, what is the relative pricing between the East region and the Frankfurt region, or whatever the Azure Europe region is?
So here's,
You can show on VMs real fast, AzurePrice.net.
I don't know if my laptop's hooked up to the Wi-Fi, but
For VMs, they'll show you
Yeah.
only less than 6% difference.
so, but here's the interesting part though. You put it out. You said that legal was sitting next to them. So for anybody who's gone ahead and dealt with legal, as they always go and throw fun into the mix, depending on what your data is or what you're working with, there is laws against what data can go overseas, especially within healthcare. Being here in Florida and working in Availity, I have contractors who can't work on certain applications because the data is here to Florida and they are from overseas. They're not allowed to see the data, they're not allowed to work with it. It's not allowed to leave the Florida region. So how do you manage that? It's called the security in you model. So security in you is all of your applications are going to be encrypted in transit. They are going to usually be HIPAA compliant. They will go ahead and fully disclose that. It is all about how do you set up the controls in place that the cloud provider says, hey, my stuff from a audit perspective meets all these requirements. It falls onto your Sarbanes-Oxley's policies. And how do you manage that and implement it? Hence the security in you model. You are just as responsible for setting it up. And if you somehow violate that by, i.e., sending data where it shouldn't be or giving someone access, that's their clause of getting out of trouble. So while all of their applications and policies may be HIPAA or restrict like that, if you do not set up your security in you model correctly, it's gonna give you a bad time and you're gonna have issues. So I highly recommend, once again, using your Azure rep. Or your AWS rep, whoever your contract rep is, this is what they do. So the person who taught me all the budgeting and stuff was my ex-father-in-law. And I say ex because I'm recently divorced, but he worked for Microsoft Azure. He runs the entire East Coast on the education vertical. So the big thing is that those people, they're here to help you set up, to get it running, and also do it at the most minimal cost. They're here to help you and want you to use the services. They want to keep you as a customer, right? It doesn't help them if they're setting you up for failure. So are there any other questions? You first and then you.
So I don't know anything about cloud. Right?
Yep.
So forgive me if I'm
No, it's fine.
But I don't quite get how the presentations actually solve the problem at hand. So for example, it says the CTO is scared the cost will be out of control. So
Yep.
we look at 2.5 million revenue fine. The on-premise cost is 3 million, and you get a 20% discount. It does not mean you're going to be profitable. That 20% discount is off of what? It could be 6 million for one account. I have no idea. There's nothing here that actually indicates what that cost will be relative to on-premise.
And VMs in Azure at a flat rate are not necessarily cheaper than buying the blades and running them that way. If you start accounting for, as I said, the lease, the electricity, the air conditioning, it can be cheaper. But you don't have to pay for physical maintenance. If the machines break, Azure will go and replace them typically without even any downtime on your case.
Yeah, most times you will never realize if they have to switch over to VMs or if they have to switch from one VM to another. All that is all transparent to you as the user. And you are paying for the cost of that VM versus, like he was saying, the maintenance to run the actual servers, the lease, the electricity, the cooling, everything else.
Or this is an example. I was at a Google talk 5 years ago where when Hardly, the kernel issue, Google had not only patched all their machines, they had moved all their existing VMs for all their customers onto the new VM the day Hardly was released because they'd been warned ahead of time before it was public. They hadn't even told their customers, how have you looked? They had already patched it before the customers even asked them, and the customers had not seen any downtime for a huge security issue.
So, and therein that also lies the more profitability that if you're on-prem and you have to go ahead and patch it and you're down, you're losing money.
I'm not sure thumbnail-wise, are we talking, well, for the group, can we get a thumbnail of how many network and system administrators you're thinking you would have for something with 3 million annual spend? I'm guesstimating for the 2 and 1, sysadmin, network admin. And something to keep in mind is if all of those are downsized, you still have to remember you need the people who may or may not be CapEx. You still have to have a network heavy and a
Yep.
system heavy that is going to keep your building connected to everything else or manage anything on-prem and then the out-of-band controls for it.
No, absolutely. And so that's the thing. So typically, for every 2 million, it's about, depending on if you're going senior to non-senior, usually you can probably get about 7 people or so, right? At least that's been from my fully loaded rate what I've done. Typically I can get about, I don't know, 4 engineers and then 3 contractors. Usually has been like what I've been trying to planning off of. But you're right. So right now the 2.5 million doesn't also, well, 3 million costs doesn't account for also how many of those people need to be your sysadmins and stuff like that, right? So that's why when you are doing a reduction of staff, or if you're looking at it as a possibility, typically if you're doing an infrastructure service, this is my opinion is, you don't get rid of any of your infrastructure staff. They're there to help you maintain it. They're there to help you do it. If you do platform as a service, I would look at a 25% reduction. Why 25%? Because at 50%, you're going to start running into skeleton crew problems. You're going to have people who can't have coverage. You're going to have people who you don't have a backup, right? At 25%, you can go ahead and at least have a decent sized team that is able to support each other. Because at the end of the day, that's what you need. You also need to make sure that as you're doing these things, you're not stripping it to bare bones skeleton crew, like, oh, well, you know, if I'm on PaaS, I have Microsoft running my servers, running my network security, right? Let me just go ahead and get rid of all my network people. Let me just get rid of all of them. That's going to be a bad time. You want to keep at least a small team, and I like to call them my CATS team, my little team that I can go ahead and move from project to project or area to area to go ahead and cover. And I always like to make sure that I have at least 3 people. 1 primary, 1 backup, and a backup for my backup.
I was going to say, even with the IaaS, you're probably going to find that they have 10 to 15% of the time to work on all those projects that everyone knows need to get done but nobody can touch.
And that is also correct. That's how you go ahead and do a now that is talking about reprioritizing your staff. So rather than reducing staff, you reprioritize your staff to different projects that can go ahead and make you more money, make you more profitable, or, as I was saying, taking that CapEx model and go ahead and expand on it, so while you may be spending more money up front, you're still being able to write off your P&L. So you're able to go ahead and still be profitable and keep your current staff and not have to reduce anybody, and then bring in more projects to offset that if you look like you're running into a negative balance.
So it's one of the benefits, you know, we say staff reduction is another way to look at that increased ability to scale.
Yes. So
instead of having to add a new team member every time I reach, X benchmark, I'm empowering this team
to go ahead, yes. And at the end of the day, you are now self-empowering your teams to manage their own stuff. And the one thing you brought up is about stability and scalability. So I think we all have to go ahead and admit to ourselves that our infrastructure may not always be as stable as somebody as Microsoft. Our scalability is not going to be as quick as Microsoft or AWS. And that's just the truth, and that's just the nature of the beast. If I want to go ahead and if I want to scale up my system, if it's, you know, actual physical hardware, I'm going to have to go buy more cores. I'm going to go ahead and have to buy another server, rent out another rack. When you're paying on the cloud, it's not, I have to go buy another rack, I have to go buy another server, I have to go buy X, Y, and Z. It's literally, oh, let me go ahead and look at the next tier up. Or let me go and look at they have generation servers, right? They have stuff that was on last year's, they have on stuff that's running on the year before's infrastructure. And they give you discounts at those costs. So maybe you're not running on the newest technology with the highest, I don't know, freaking cores, whatever else. I'm trying to think for infrastructure, what else there would be. So JLP, that's why I was looking at you to help me out there.
It's the IOPS and the throughput you get.
Right, so you may not be getting the max, and IOPS is the input-output throughput for, basically it's a mix of CPU, disk space, and the input-outputs is how you actually totally calculate your IOPS, right? You can run it on later generation technology that they offer, but they offer a pretty steep discounted rate. So if you're okay with getting a little bit less IOPS, but a much bigger savings, that's a way of doing it. And you can't really do that with an on-prem infrastructure. You can, but it's really difficult. So unless you got hardware stored in the back, or you know a vendor at a part shop that you can go ahead and get stuff for cheap, right? It makes it very difficult to go ahead and execute that, where in your cloud provider, it's literally a couple clicks. Any other questions? Yes?
I also know 0 things about the cloud for the most part. And I also work at Availity, so I'm going to kind of use us as an example
Excellent.
for my question. But when we move to the clouds, we have a lot of applications.
Yep.
We handle a ton of applications. So do you partition space per application in the cloud, or is it, like, how does that work with so many different applications that do a bunch of different things and have a bunch of different transactions and times?
So I'm going to channel my inner Pravat here for, for that. So Pravat, by the way, for everyone to know, is our VP of Technology. He's also leading our cloud initiative. So Pravat would say it depends, but it also is, for him, the way that I feel like he's worked and the way I kind of agree with it too is you look at your application and does it make sense to go ahead and set it up on its own environment, on its own resource group when it comes to the management of that, right? We have stuff like MDM, which is our, it's our master data management, it's our golden record tool. On my team, we actively use it. I know it's actively used across other teams. It's really hard to just say, hey, let me put it up there and then split the cost evenly across all the teams. So there is times that we look at going ahead and breaking out those resources and doing that, or we would do a flat cost across the org. For example, the Oracle stuff, that would be, not that it would be, it will be a split across whoever needs to use it, right? So you can actually look though and set up a different account and say, how much of that resource though are you using, right? Are you taking more of that utilization from other people? And you could granularity break it down to that, hey, Team X, you're using about 30%, you're gonna take 30% of the cost. Team Y, you're using 10%, you're gonna go ahead and take 10% of the cost. So there are ways to do that, and I could see us go ahead and doing that and implementing that at Availity. Any other questions? Yes.
I was curious, you talked about like getting discounts and
Yep.
signing a contract for like maybe a certain number of years. I think for that contract, like eventually you have to re-sign the contract. Do they, in your experience, do they typically raise the prices? Like how?
I have yet to see Azure, AWS really jack up prices when it comes to
Prices stay
stuff.
pretty flat. The contracts are more, the reservations he's talking about is you commit to be buying this type of CPU for 1 year, 3 years, and then you either pay it all up front.
Or you can pay it over a
or you
month.
pay it month to month.
It's like a cell phone plan. So if you pay it all up front too, though, they usually do throw you an extra 10, 20% off the discount.
Azure doesn't at least.
Azure, AWS has, because when I've looked at it.
They finally add a month to month and you get the same discount.
Same discount across the board? That's a shame. Because yeah, usually they usually want to incentivize you to pay up front.
Except Azure is 47 and 67% on average for 1 and 3 years.
Wow, yeah, so.
It's like, I'm gonna promise I'm gonna use this many VMs. It doesn't matter what you use it for, so it's
Yeah.
like
Yep.
shut down an application, you still have that space available to you.
Any other questions?
But I was gonna say, the other thing that comes with the
Damn, we run.
reservations, if you're signing a contract, you also, as a company, if you're signing those contracts, it gets you, especially the extra rebates thing, you're committing to be spending $5,000 a month on the cloud.
Yes.
For the next 5 years. No matter, and if you don't, you're still spending $5,000 a month. Minimum. Yeah.
So, and yes, so there are contract negotiations you can do with the vendors. So for anyone who didn't hear him, so what John was saying is that typically when you do these contracts with your cloud providers, they offer you these discounts on the expected that you're going to spend so much a month on their services. Now, here's the fun part. The contract, that spend rate, while maybe it's sometimes it's monthly or months, usually it's a year rate. So like at Availity, we have to spend so much a year. If you don't even come close to that, the question is, how do I then spend that much to make sure I still get the discounts? That's when, in my opinion, you go ahead and you incentivize your engineers. Think of new product ideas. Think of POCs. How do I go ahead to hit that so that way when I have to go and re-sign next year, I'm not going to be bumped up a rate. So you can actually use that as a way to incentivize new engineers, new infrastructure people. I sat in on the Akka.net the first day that they were talking here about setting it up, and the guy's like, oh, this is really expensive to set up. Well, heck, you can do a lot of that stuff on the cloud. You can set up, it doesn't have to be set up like the on-prem like he was discussing, but there's a quick way to go ahead and do it. If you need real-time communication apps, go ahead and try setting it up in the cloud. For Azure, you would use Logic Apps and Functions. For AWS, you would use Glue, and you would use Redshift and stitch all the services together. Encourage your engineers to think of POCs, and if you have a budget and you have to at least spend that money, otherwise you're gonna be spending more next year, then encourage your engineers to take on that as incentivizing challenges to think of new ideas for the team, for the product, and for the company as a whole. Maybe you hit a gold mine where it's like the next Facebook, if that's still like a thing that people do now. I don't know. I haven't done Facebook in a while, but everybody I remember back when I first started programming was like, I want to be the next Facebook. So, any other questions? Yes?
So our problem statement is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So we write software and the customer has the hardware.
Okay.
They deploy that.
Yep.
And so we wanted to ensure that I think lots of folks have spoken about the benefits of being on the cloud.
Yep.
So we wanted to have our software run on the cloud infrastructure. But there are a lot of customers over here, and if we have hosted our software on the cloud
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure, and if these customers are sharing this infrastructure, how do I price that customer A, customer B, this is how much you're going to bill to you and how much you're going to bill. It's like, of course, if it is within internal, the product
Yep.
is sharing within the company, you're saying that team A, you take 30%, you take 40%.
Yep.
I think it works out properly because they both are internal within the company. But the customers, so how do I go and as a product manager or something, and how do I sell saying that you buy our software
Yep.
in the cloud infrastructure versus your infrastructure, and that's where the selling point is not able to, we are not able to make the ice breaking there.
So,
Do you have any recommendations like
yeah. No, so the best way to do that, in my opinion, is set up your clients by resource groups. Within, if you're using Azure, break it up by resource groups. AWS has something very similar to that. But basically, you're like, client A, you're this resource group. Here are the applications that are tied to your resource group. Here are the databases that you're using to it. And you can then run your pricing models based off of how much is that resource group going to cost you. That will then give you, hey, client A, if I'm charging you $100,000, it's costing me $100,000 to run you, bump it up to like 150 or something like that, but you can actually break down to the resource group, to the, so it goes the application to resource group, then I think there's another application pool that goes, yeah, I'm trying to remember that.
Resources are in resource groups or in subscriptions or in
There we go. And then it rolls up to the sources. So it all depends on how you want to set up for your resource groups. I would probably tie your clients to the resource groups and then run billing per resource group. So that way you know everything that's within client A, that's how much our resource group. If you have something that's shared services across your organization that maybe is not tied to that specific client, put it in a shared resources group. And then you can go ahead and know, hey, resource A is costing me this much. If it leverages any of the shared resources, because resource groups can talk to other resource groups, you can go ahead and see how much are they using of that shared services, and then you would break it out. And it's really easy to set up in these calculators to do that forecasting. And it will even tell you, actually, it will go out, I think, from 1 month all the way out to 1 year of what's the expected forecast spend at your current settings, what will it cost you. So you can even give them a yearly breakdown as well, up front without them even spending a dime.
Yeah, I think you're speaking about one-to-one resource groups.
Yep.
I think unfortunately that leads up more costs. We tried that, it leads up more costs than our customers is having. If you do a one-to-one resource group mapping, so we wanted to reduce the cost, but it did not work out.
Okay.
That's the reason I specifically.
No. So yeah. So is the problem that you're trying to solve is how much are you going to sell to a client or to a group of clients? So, I mean, like I said, I would break it out into resource groups or to application pools, depending on how you want to do that. And then the cost, if you're going to share resources, look at the Elastic pools, look at some of the shared services that they do. I'm trying to remember. Manage instances within Azure for SQL. Those, while they may run a little bit more, they are considered business critical apps, and they do have auto run for, or a auto read, so you can do reporting and stuff out. There's ways to do that. Look at the technologies if you're looking at ways of reducing costs that way. Any other questions? All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming to my presentation. I appreciate it, and hopefully you guys learned something out of it. So thank you, everybody.